They mocked her, threw her mop in the trash, and laughed, but the next morning, her face was on every screen in the building. It was nearly midnight at the Gleamker Tower, a shimmering office complex in downtown Seattle. Most lights were off, except in the main lobby and the executive floor. The janitorial team had begun their routine sweep, and among them was a woman whose presence most employees no longer noticed. Martha Langley had worked here for over 20 years. Her gray-streaked hair was always tucked beneath a faded cap. Her movements were slow but steady, deliberate, and precise. She never missed a stain. Her gloves, though patched, were always clean. Her uniform bore a badge stitched so many times it no longer resembled the company logo. That night, Martha moved quietly through the executive lounge, wiping down the glass conference table as voices echoed from the hallway. "Still here?" "I swear she sleeps in the supply closet," a voice chuckled. It was Ken, one of the younger managers, followed by giggles from two interns. "She probably thinks she owns this place," another joked, tossing a paper cup across the floor without guilt. Martha bent down and picked up the cup. She said nothing. She never did. But behind her silence was something no one suspected. Not pity, not shame, but quiet calculation. At 12:17 a.m., after scrubbing the marble lobby floor for the last time, she returned to the locker room. The lights flickered slightly, and she paused. Something in her routine felt final. She placed her mop and gloves on the wall rack, opened her locker, and stared for a long while at a small wooden box inside. Then she shut the door gently and walked out of the building. Unbeknownst to the others, this would be her final night as a cleaner. Morning arrived with the usual buzz of office life. Elevator doors pinged open and shut, heels clicked across marble floors, and the sound of overpriced coffee cups slamming onto desks echoed to the hallways of Gleamker Corporation. Martha arrived just before 6 a.m., as she always did. She wore her uniform with the same quiet dignity, though her eyes at day held a glint of something deeper, something unreadable. She had just finished wiping down the reception desk when a young assistant approached her, nervous, fidgeting. Miss Langley, Mr. Blanton wants to see you in HR. Right now." Martha nodded slowly. Of course. Inside the HR office, the air was stale. On one side of the table sat Gerald Blanton, the recently promoted operations manager known more for his networking than his leadership. Next to him sat a woman in a navy pantsuit, someone from corporate legal, perhaps. "Martha," Blanton began, not meeting her eyes, "we want to thank you for your years of service. Really, it's been appreciated. But the company is undergoing structural optimization. We're letting go of several non-essential roles. Your name came up." She sat perfectly still. "To be clear, this isn't performance-based," the woman in the suit added, her tone clinical. "You'll receive a modest severance package. You'll need to vacate the premises by this afternoon." Martha tilted her head slightly. "I see." Blanton forced a smile. "And maybe now's a good time to enjoy retirement, right?" Martha stood up. No reaction. No tremble. No tears. She only said, "I'll gather my things." As she walked out, Blanton whispered behind her, "Honestly, it's about time." She heard it. She didn't stop walking. In the janitor's room, Martha neatly folded her uniform and placed it on the table. She picked up her box, an old container wrapped in leather straps, and paused to glance once more at the hallway she'd mopped thousands of times. As she exited the building for the last time, no one clapped. No one thanked her. But at the corner of the lobby, the security guard named Felix gave her a faint nod. And that was enough, because tomorrow the entire building would remember her name. That afternoon, as the cleaners rotated shifts and took over Martha's unfinished section, a younger custodian named Tara noticed something left behind in one of the lockers. It was an old wristwatch, neatly wrapped in a cloth and tucked under a bottle of polish. Curious, Tara picked it up. The leather strap was cracked but intact. The glass had a faint scratch, but what caught her attention was the engraving on the back. It read, "To Martha W. Langley, for every unseen act that built this legacy. R.W." Tara frowned. She didn't know who R.W. was, But the inscription was far more personal than anything she had seen on company memorabilia. It wasn't corporate merchandise. It was something else. Something deeper. She brought the watch to the front desk, hoping to hand it over to the receptionist. But the young man there barely looked up. She got fired, didn't she? Just toss it in lost and found. Tara hesitated, then quietly slid the watch into her own backpack. Something told her this story wasn't over. Meanwhile, across town, Martha sat at a long walnut table inside a private law firm. Papers were spread across the surface. Her glasses rested on the bridge of her nose, her posture upright. "Are you certain about the timing?" the attorney asked. "Yes," Martha replied calmly. "Tomorrow morning. I want the announcement to hit as soon as the stock exchange opens. I've already secured control of the shares. The board won't see it coming." The attorney leaned back, and after that, Martha placed a wooden box onto the table. She unstrapped it and pulled out a thick envelope. "This company forgot the soul was built on," she said. "Tomorrow, I'm going to remind them." At exactly 4:00 a.m., just hours before the building reopened for another bustling workday, a discreet but powerful sequence of transactions began to unfold on the digital floor of the stock exchange. Through a labyrinth of holding companies and private trusts, the majority shares of Gleamker Corporation changed hands. Not a bell rang. Not a headline blared. It happened in silence, clean, precise, and perfectly timed. By 4:17 a.m., Martha Langley held 52.4% of Gleamker's voting shares. She sat in her modest apartment, no longer wearing her janitor uniform but a tailored charcoal blazer, her white shirt crisp and pressed. A cup of tea steamed beside her. The television, muted, displayed financial tickers crawling across the screen. She smiled. At the same moment, a notification chimed on the phone of Charles Merritt, the CEO of Gleamker. Bleary-eyed and groggy, he reached for the device. Subject: change in majority ownership, urgent. He blinked, then sat up straight. Another message arrived within seconds. Request for emergency board meeting, 9:00 a.m. sharp. His heart raced. He barely noticed a third message. New primary shareholder, Martha W. Langley. Meanwhile, back at the office, employees were beginning to file in. Ken, the smug manager who once joked about Martha living in the supply closet, stepped into the elevator with a coffee and two interns behind him. "Did you guys hear?" one of them said. "Something weird happened with the company's shares this morning. Like, someone bought up a ton of them. Probably one of those East Coast venture types," Ken muttered. "No one local's got that kind of cash." On the lobby screens, a message suddenly flashed. Company-wide announcement. Emergency shareholder address at 9:00 a.m. in the main auditorium. Attendance is mandatory. Ken scoffed. Another pep talk from Charlie? Great. Wake me up when it's over. None of them noticed the security footage in the corner monitor, where a woman in heels and a gray overcoat stepped through the private entrance. It was Martha, and she wasn't holding a mop. By 8:57 a.m., the main auditorium at Gleamker was packed. Executives filled the front rows, whispering nervously. Mid-level managers sat rigidly in the middle, checking their phones, confused by the lack of agenda. Lower staff huddled near the back, watching curiously, sensing something off. No one had any idea who had called the meeting. Charles Merritt, the CEO, paced just off stage. His assistant whispered something urgently into his ear. He looked pale, shaken. The last 30 minutes had been a blur. Lawyers on the phone, missed calls from investors, and a single, jarring truth confirmed over and over again. Martha Langley now owned the company. At 9:01 a.m., the room went dark. The lights dimmed. A single spotlight hit the center of the stage. Murmurs filled the air. Then footsteps echoed. Soft, steady, deliberate. Martha appeared from stage left, walking calmly, her chin slightly lifted. She wore no badge, no credentials, and no hesitation. She stopped at the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out over the crowd. A long silence. Then she spoke. "Some of you may remember me. Most of you probably never saw me at all." A stir ran through the audience. "I cleaned this building for 27 years. I was here before many of you started. I saw this company built, brick by brick, from the ideals of people who believed in legacy, not just profits. No one moved. I mopped the floors of the original founder's office. Robert Walker was my husband. Some of you knew him only as a signature on the wall. I knew him as the man who built this company with his bare hands and his heart. Gasps scattered like raindrops. Charles Merritt looked like he'd swallow glass. Martha continued. When Robert passed away, I never stepped forward. I didn't want the board or the spotlight. I wanted to see for myself what this company had become. So I came back as a cleaner. No one asked questions. No one cared. Her voice remained steady, cold as steel wrapped in silk. And yesterday, this company decided I was no longer useful. She paused, then leaned forward. Today, I decide what's useful. While stunned silence still held the auditorium in its grip, the executive board had already been summoned to the top floor. Security personally escorted each member to the glass-wall conference room they once ruled. Charles Merritt arrived last, his face flushed, jaw clenched. His steps were quick but uncertain. Inside, Martha was already seated at the head of the long black table. She wore no expression, only the same composed stare she had held while cleaning coffee spills just 2 nights ago. One by one, the board members sat. Some still hadn't processed the shift in power. Others were whispering among themselves, attempting to decipher what legal maneuver she'd pulled. One dared to break the tension. "This is outrageous," said Linda Cormick, VP of Operations. "Even if you did acquire the shares, this isn't how business transitions work." Martha tilted her head slightly. "Oh, is there a specific handbook for how a cleaner should buy the company that fired her?" The room fell silent again. "Let me explain something," Martha said, her fingers gently tapping the polished wood table. "When my husband passed, his trust transferred voting rights of his shares to me. I chose not to activate them. Until now." She slid a folder across the table. Inside was documentation, signed, notarized, verified. Not even their legal team could dispute it. "But that's not all," she continued. "For the past 6 months, I've been purchasing outstanding shares under multiple holding groups. The majority has shifted. This company no longer belongs to you." A board member cleared his throat. "If your concern is legacy, we can find a role for you." "No," Martha interrupted. "This isn't about finding me a role. It's about removing those who forgot what this company stands for." She opened another folder. On top was a list. Names, titles, infractions. "I've documented every act of negligence, mistreatment, and manipulation that's taken place over the past 3 years. I've seen more from a cleaning cart than you have from your corner offices." Her eyes locked on Charles. "You especially." He stood, outraged. "You don't have the authority to—" "I do," she cut in, her voice sharp. "As of this morning, your contract has been voided. You're relieved of duty, effective immediately." 2 security officers entered the room. Charles stared at them, then at the other board members, waiting for someone to object. No one did, not one soul. He was escorted out, speechless. News of what had happened upstairs began to leak within minutes. By 11 o'clock a.m., whispers were flying faster than emails. Some staff members passed it off as gossip. Others noticed the shift immediately. The receptionist screen no longer displayed the welcome message with Charles Merritt's name. Instead, it simply read, "Under new leadership." Tara, the young custodian who had found Martha's watch, sat in the break room, her earbuds out for once. She listened intently as office chatter buzzed around her. "Did you hear? The janitor, Martha, she's like the owner now." "No way. That can't be real. Isn't she the one who got fired yesterday?" "I saw her walk into the boardroom. She wasn't in uniform. She's Robert Walker's wife. The founder. It's all over the internal memo." Tara clutched her backpack, the weight of the watch inside it suddenly heavier. Meanwhile, in the analytic department, Ken stood frozen in front of his monitor. His inbox had just pinged. Subject: Executive Evaluation Notice. He clicked it. "Dear Kenneth G. Blake, you have been selected for direct review based on behavioral feedback and team incident reports. Please report to conference room B12 by 3 o'clock p.m. today. Office of the chair. He felt cold. He remembered every sarcastic joke. Every time he spoke loudly near the cleaning staff. Every coffee spill he walked past. Every insult he threw at Martha's back. Now she had an office. And he had a warning. At the far end of the building, Martha walked calmly through the engineering floor. Dozens of heads turned. Some stood. Some bowed slightly, unsure how to greet her. She paused at one desk. An older employee, Tony, looked up. "Martha?" She smiled faintly. "Hi, Tony." He slowly rose to his feet. "You were always kind. Never said much. But you remember my daughter's name. Every year." "I remember people who build," Martha said softly. "Not just those who manage." Tony's eyes glistened. "What happens now?" Martha looked around the floor, people peeking over cubicles, pretending not to listen but hanging on every word. She said, "Now we rebuild." Martha stood in front of the founder's wall, a massive marble slab etched with the company's core values: integrity, humility, perseverance, words that had long since become decorative rather than directional. Beside the wall hung a black and white portrait of Robert Walker. Most employees had walked past it 100 times without a second glance. She stared at the photo in silence, then reached into her handbag and pulled out a folded letter, yellowed with time. It was addressed in Robert's handwriting. "To my Martha, for the day they forget who we are." She opened it slowly, revealing not just his words, but his vision, a sketch of how he once imagined Gleamker would look in 10 years. A place with dignity at every level, where janitors had voices, where innovation started from the ground up. Martha's eyes moved across the drawing of smiling workers and open-door policies. Notes scribbled in the margins. "Never forget the cleaners. They see everything." She closed the letter, then turned to her assistant. "Schedule a founder's address for tomorrow morning. I'll speak to the entire company myself." "Yes, ma'am. Should we write a speech?" "No," Martha said gently. "I've already lived it." That afternoon, she made her way to the building's old archives, a forgotten room in the sub-basement where blueprints, invoices, and employee logs from decades past were kept. She moved with purpose. Inside, she located a shelf labeled 1997, founding year. From it, she pulled a dusty ledger, the first employee roster. Martha Langley was employee number 0002. Number 0001 was Robert Walker. She ran her fingers down the list. Names she remembered. People who had long left, retired, or passed on. Builders. Friends. Foundations. She turned to a newer file. Employee complaints, internal reports, emails ignored. A pattern emerged. Productivity pressures had turned compassion into numbers. Loyalty had been replaced with metrics. Respect had become optional. Until now, at 6 o'clock p.m., Martha stood once more at a large office window overlooking downtown Seattle. The sky was melting into gold. Her phone buzzed. It was Felix, the night shift security guard. He simply texted, "They're all talking about you." "In a good way." Martha typed a reply. "Tell them I'm still here. I just changed floors." She smiled. Tomorrow, the cleaners would enter through the front door, not the side, and every single one of them would be handed a letter. At sunrise, an envelope was placed on every desk, every locker, and every workstation, addressed personally to each employee by name. Handwritten, real ink, not printed by machine. The building buzzed with confusion as people slowly peeled open the letters. Inside, each message was different, but shared a common thread: gratitude. To some, Martha wrote, "I saw how you helped a new guy on his first day, even when no one asked you to. That mattered." To others, "I remember the time you stayed late to clean up a spill in the stairwell. You didn't know I was watching. I was." And to the cleaning team, "You were never invisible. You were the spine, the hands, the heart. This place doesn't stand without you." The responses were instant and raw. Some employees wept quietly at their desks. Others walked out into the hallway, holding their letters like lifelines. Ken sat frozen in his cubicle, his letter unopened for nearly 15 minutes. When he finally read it, the ink seemed to sting more than words. I heard every joke, every whisper. I forgave them. But now I need you to ask yourself, was it worth it? His hands trembled. He felt small for the first time. Not because someone diminished him, but because he saw his reflection clearly, perhaps for the first time. In the janitor's lounge, silence hung in the air as each cleaner opened their letter. Tara, the youngest, found two things inside hers. A note. You found my watch. You followed your conscience. That's leadership. I'd like you to shadow my office for 2 weeks. Let's see where it leads. And a key card labeled Executive Access. The rest of the crew exchanged looks of disbelief. Some of them had worked in that building for decades without so much as a birthday card. Now, their names had been written by hand, their work remembered. Meanwhile, on the main floor, Martha stepped into the center of the lobby as staff began to gather. Word had spread. She didn't need to call a meeting. They came on their own. She looked around at the sea of faces, curious, hesitant, hopeful. I won't pretend to know every answer, she began. But I do know this. Every empire that forgets its foundation eventually crumbles. She held up her own letter. This time, we rebuild from the bottom up. Applause broke out. Not the kind led by peer pressure, but the kind that starts with goosebumps and ends in tears. Martha nodded once, then turned and walked toward the elevators. She pressed a button for the top floor, and this time, everyone watched her go up. Over the next 3 days, the atmosphere at Gleamker shifted. Quietly, steadily, unavoidably. Martha had instructed her team to conduct private interviews, not performance reviews, but value evaluations. Each department head, each mid-level manager, and even long-standing supervisors were brought into quiet rooms for one-on-one conversations. But they weren't led by human resources. They were led by former support staff. Tony from maintenance, Lydia from the mailroom, Felix from security. Their questions were simple. When was the last time you said thank you to your team? Can you name the first names of your cleaning crew? Have you ever worked a shift in the warehouse or the loading dock? Some executives fumbled for words. Some laughed nervously. A few got up and left mid-interview. Those names were noted. Ken sat in the waiting area for over an hour before he was finally called in. His hands were clammy. The letter still haunted him. Inside the room sat Felix, the night security guard. Calm, composed, professional. You know who I am? Felix asked. Ken nodded. Felix smiled lightly. Good. I know you, too. Ken tried to break the tension. So is this like Karma Week? Felix didn't flinch. No, this is Accountability Week. Ken dropped his gaze. You don't need to justify what you did, Felix said, but you do need to own it. Ken whispered, I didn't think anyone really paid attention. We always do, Felix replied. You just never look back. While the evaluations continued, Martha met with the board's legal team. She had prepared a list, not just of staff to be reviewed, but of those to be quietly removed. Some were executives who had funneled bonuses while laying off entire teams. Others had covered internal harassment reports. One, it turned out, had used janitorial labor to run personal errands off company hours. They were all given the same message. You are no longer aligned with this company's direction. No fanfare, no press, just silence, followed by change. That Friday, an email arrived to all employees. It read, Monday will be the first day of Gleamker's Restoration Week. Expect a new schedule. Expect new conversations. Expect to be seen. Martha W. Langley, chairwoman. And below there was a line that hadn't been part of any Gleamker email for over 15 years. Built by hands. Led by hearts. The legacy of the founder had returned, and for the first time in years, the building exhaled. Monday morning came with an unusual sight. The front doors of Gleamker, usually opened by silent security staff, now stood wide open. Martha herself stood just inside the lobby, greeting every employee as they entered. No cameras, no media, just a quiet voice. Good morning, Julia. Glad to see you, Carlos. I hope your son's feeling better, Anya. Some employees looked stunned. Others looked humbled. All felt noticed. The elevators had been temporarily disabled, and a sign at the entrance read, "This week we walk together." Everyone took the stairs. Executives in loafers, engineers in sneakers, janitors in work boots. Laughter echoed off the stairwells where silence had once lived. On each floor, breakfast carts were set up, real food, hot and homemade, with name tags placed at each table. Departments were mixed intentionally. IT ate beside security. Legal shared tables with shipping. Cleaning staff were seated at the head, not the fringe. At 10 o'clock a.m., workshops began, but not about profits, not about quarterly projections. The sessions had titles like Dignity at Every Level, Listening Without Waiting to Talk, Rebuilding Trust from the Basement Up. Some grumbled at first, but as hours passed, eyes opened. One session was led by Lydia from the mailroom. She told a story of how, for 5 years, she delivered urgent contracts upstairs without a single hello in return. Another was led by Tony, who spoke about fixing the same jam vending machine for 7 years without ever being acknowledged, until Martha called him by name. Martha herself hosted the final session of the day. She stood in the middle of the auditorium, not at the podium. "This isn't about revenge," she said. "It's about memory. Some of you forgot what it feels like to be overlooked. Others of you were never seen in the first place." She paused. "But now we remember. And from now on, we rise together." Someone in the back began to clap. Then another. Then the room. Martha didn't bow. She didn't wave. She simply smiled, stepped down from the center, and walked to sit beside the cafeteria dishwasher named Raul. Together, they shared lunch. No titles, just people. By midweek, a quiet revolution had begun. Gleamker's mission statement, once a corporate buzzword etched in glass near the main lobby, was now rewritten, not by consultants, but by staff. In an open forum held in the shipping bay, whiteboards were brought out, markers passed around. Everyone from accounting interns to janitors contributed. Someone wrote, "Respect isn't a perk. It's a policy." Another added, "We don't rise by stepping over others. We rise by lifting." Martha, standing silently at the back of the crowd, watched the lines take shape. Then she stepped forward, wrote 3 words in bold. "Every floor matters." That line became the company's new motto. In departments across the company, structural changes quietly rolled in. The janitorial team received upgraded equipment, new uniforms, and, for the first time in company history, a designated representative who sat in on leadership meetings. Warehouse workers received pay adjustments and shift flexibility based on family schedules. The security team got new rest areas, proper training support, and hazard compensation they had been denied for years. But perhaps most remarkably, a new policy was announced. Every employee, regardless of role or rank, would spend 1 day each quarter shadowing a department they didn't belong to. Lawyers would walk the warehouse. Engineers would help in mail sorting. Executives would clean a floor side by side with the custodial team. The first to volunteer, Martha. She cleaned the 22nd floor with Tara, sweeping and mopping while sharing stories of the building's earliest days. "Why didn't you say anything before?" Tara asked as they emptied a trash bin. "I wanted to see if the silence would speak louder than my name," Martha replied. And it did. Some resisted the changes. They muttered about image management, about optics, about unnecessary sentiment. But they were the few. Most employees, especially those long overlooked, embraced the shift. It wasn't just policy. It was personal. It wasn't perfect. Mistakes were made. Tempers flared. But when they did, people talked. And more importantly, they listened. By the end of the week, a company once defined by corners and walls began to feel like a place of windows. Everyone could see. Everyone was seen. And as Friday drew to a close, something happened that hadn't occurred in over a decade. Staff from every department gathered in the atrium, not by order, but by instinct. There were no speeches, just music, food, laughter, and the sound of a company coming back to life. In the days that followed, a deeper change emerged, not just in policies or paychecks, but in people. Those who had once walked past others without a glance now nodded, now stopped to ask questions, now offered help. Not all at once, not perfectly, but something had shifted. Ken, once a loud and arrogant middle manager, was quieter now, more observant. He showed up early to his scheduled janitorial rotation, broom in hand, uncertain and awkward. Tara handed him gloves without a word. Later that day, as they swept the eastern stairwell, Ken finally muttered, "I'm sorry for everything." Tara didn't reply immediately. She simply looked at him, then nodded once, and that was enough. Felix, the security guard, was promoted Director of Operations Integrity. His role, ensuring that no act of kindness, disrespect, or silence went unnoticed, not as punishment, but as proof that character still mattered. In his first address, he said, "We don't just secure doors anymore. We secure culture." Tony, from maintenance, began mentoring interns, teaching them the quiet architecture of the building, not just how systems worked, but how to care for things unseen. Lydia from a mailroom helped establish a new program, Letters of Legacy. Each month, employees could nominate a colleague to be honored with a handwritten note from leadership, personally signed by Martha. By the end of the first month, over 400 nominations were submitted, and Martha, she did not sit behind a gold-plated desk. She chose a modest corner office on the same floor as her former janitor's closet. Inside, she kept two things on the wall: the letter Robert had written her and a photo of her former mop cart. Visitors often asked why she kept that old photo up. She always answered the same way. That cart saw more of this company than any board member ever did. The building, once sterile and gray, began to blossom with color. Murals painted by staff, photo walls filled with moments that once passed unseen. Gleamco was not just profitable again. It was human again. And the people who had once been ignored were now the ones others came to for wisdom, for truth, for direction. Late one evening, as the last elevator doors closed and the building quieted, Tara knocked gently on Martha's open door. She held something wrapped in soft fabric. "I think this belongs to you," she said, stepping forward. Martha looked up from a stack of handwritten letters. "What is it?" Tara unfolded the cloth and revealed the old wristwatch, the one with the worn leather strap and the engraving on the back. "I found it in your locker the day they fired you. I didn't know what to do with it, but I couldn't throw it away." Martha took the watch slowly, her fingers brushing the engraving. "To Martha W. Langley, for every unseen act that built this legacy. R.W." For a moment, her eyes glistened. She turned the watch over in her hand and smiled. "This was the first gift Robert gave me after the company was formed. He said time would be the one thing I gave more than anyone else here." She looked at Tara. "You reminded me that someone still notices time." Tara hesitated. "Do you want me to put in a display case or something?" Martha shook her head gently. "No, put it back in the locker." Tara blinked. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Martha said. "Let it sit there, quietly, for the next person who thinks no one sees them. Maybe one day they'll find it and know they're not alone." The next morning, Martha had the locker painted. Fresh coat, polished handle. A small plaque mounted inside the door read, "No act is too small. No person too invisible." No one was told. No memo sent. But by the end of the week, every employee had stopped by at least once. Some came to look. Some came to think. Some just stood quietly, breathing in the presence of something that couldn't be tracked in spreadsheets or meetings. Something like grace. Outside the locker room, the old mop cart had been cleaned, restored, and placed on display in the lobby. A glass cover, a simple sign. This is what leadership once looked like. And every morning, as staff passed it on their way in, they remembered, not just Martha, but what it meant to be seen. It was a quiet Sunday when the scaffolding went up outside Gleamker Tower. No press releases, no ribbon cutting, just two workers, a welding torch, and a nameplate being carefully removed. The old company sign, Gleamker Incorporated, had hung above the revolving glass doors for nearly 3 decades. Clean, corporate, distant. By evening it was gone. In its place, gilded lettering now read, Langley and Walker. No slogan, no tagline, just 2 names. The legacy of a founder and the woman who carried it when everyone else forgot. Inside the building, the transformation was complete. The lobby, once cold and echoing, now held benches made of reclaimed wood from the old shipping crates. Plants lined the windowsills. A photo wall displayed candid shots of workers from every floor, smiling, fixing, helping, living. And near the center, a new installation stood, a black and white mosaic made from thousands of employee ID badge photos, from janitors to CEOs, from day one to present. At the center of the mosaic was one image, Martha holding a mop, smiling. That morning, Martha arrived just before sunrise, as she always did. But this time, the front doors opened for her automatically. She paused in the atrium, watching as the early shift clocked in security guards, technicians, overnight analysts, the cafe cook. They greeted her not with title, not with formality, just warmth. One of the new interns walked up nervously, holding a clipboard. "Excuse me, Miss Langley. I'm supposed to ask what success looks like here." Martha thought for a moment, then pointed to the floor beneath their feet. It looks like everyone who walked across this lobby finally being noticed. As she rode the elevator to the top floor, no longer the top in rank, but simply the last to clean, she passed by mirrors that once reflected nothing but suits. Now, they reflected all kinds of people, diverse, proud, seen. In her office, she placed the watch Robert gave her back on its stand. The second hand moved gently. Time hadn't stopped, but it had circled back to humility, back to humanity, back to home. A cleaner once walked these halls unseen. Now, her name is carved in steel, and the company she once mopped for now shines in her image,